Welcome back to the Grep News Podcast. I'm Bam Rather, and our show today is about how Meta's own internal documents reveal they knew Instagram was designed to be addictive to young users, like a substance they couldn't put down. Let me walk you through a paper trail. Not speculation, not hot takes, just documents, internal communications, research studies, product decisions that tell us exactly what Meta knew and when they knew it. And what they knew was this: their platforms were making young people measurably worse. Depression, anxiety, loneliness, social comparison, all declining when users stopped scrolling. They had the data. They buried it. In a Northern California federal courthouse, attorneys representing state attorneys general, school districts, and parents have been peeling back the layers of Meta's internal operations. What they found, preserved in chat logs and research reports and product meeting notes, is a company that didn't just understand the harm its platforms caused. It actively chose engagement metrics over user well-being. Again and again and again, start with something called Project Mercury. Meta conducts an internal study with a straightforward premise. What happens when people stop using Facebook for a week? The results were unambiguous. Users reported lower feelings of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and social comparison, not marginal improvements. Measurably better mental health outcomes from 7 days off the platform. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Meta discontinued the study. The reason, according to internal documents, the findings were impacted by the company's existing media narrative. Translation: people already suspected Facebook was bad for them. So when they stopped using it and felt better, Meta attributed this to expectation effect rather than platform harm. Andy Stone, Meta's spokesperson, defended this interpretation. He claimed the study was discontinued because their approach to overcome expectation effects did not work. But here's the thing about expectation effects: they don't typically produce measurable changes in depression and anxiety symptoms. Those are clinical indicators, not vibes. And when your own research shows your product increases them, calling it an expectation effect is like a cigarette company claiming lung problems are caused by people expecting to get sick. Which brings us to the tobacco comparison. Because Meta employees made it first, an internal chat captures the moment perfectly. An employee writes, "Going to look like tobacco companies doing research and knowing cigs were bad, and then keeping that info to themselves." The question isn't whether Meta employees understood what they were building. The real question is, what did they do with that understanding? Let me show you the architecture of the decisions that followed. Vaishnavi Jayakumar served as Meta's head of safety and well-being for Instagram. Her testimony, now part of the court record, reveals a company where safety mechanisms were either absent or deliberately weakened. In March of that same year, and this is years into Instagram's dominance as the platform of choice for teenagers, there was no specific way to report child sexual abuse material on Instagram. None. When asked about building such a mechanism, Jayakumar testified it would be straightforward. You essentially add an additional option to the existing number of reporting options that are out there. Simple, basic, fundamental, and absent. Then there's the strikes policy. Meta operated under what they called a 17X system for content related to human trafficking for exploitation. You could incur 16 violations for solicitation content, and upon the 17th violation, your account would be suspended. 16 chances for trafficking content. Jayakumar's reaction, preserved in her testimony, "It was very surprising to me." Meta now claims they've implemented a one-strike policy, launched not long before, with violations required for discipline lowered over time. But the timeline here matters. The testimony references policies from well after the supposedly improved system was in place. Which raises the obvious question: how long did inadequate protections remain active? And what happened to the vulnerable users exposed during that window? Brian Bolin might have an answer. He served as Meta's vice president of partnerships before resigning over safety concerns. His assessment of how the company approached user safety is preserved in the court documents. Not something that they spend a lot of time on. It's not something they think about. And I really think they don't care. That's not an activist speaking. That's a former VP. Now, you might be wondering, how does a company internally acknowledge harm while publicly testifying to Congress that they're protecting underage users? The answer lives in the gap between product decisions and public statements. Let's examine the product decisions. Meta's growth team assessed what would happen if they made all teen accounts private by default. The conclusion, documented in internal communications, it would likely smash engagement, so they rejected the idea. Privacy settings that would protect teenagers from unwanted contact and exposure were shelved because they would reduce the number of people scrolling. More after our break.
My name is Tom Sachs. I'm an artist in New York City. For nearly 2 decades, I have been collaborating with Nike.
Nike running is for runners. Nike basketball is for basketball. Nike craft is for everyone else.
They tried hiding likes a feature that could reduce social comparison and validation-seeking behavior. Internal analysis found this was pretty negative to FB metrics. The feature was walked back. Beauty filters presented another decision point. Meta's own research found these filters were encouraging young girls into body dysmorphia. The company had removed them. Then they reinstated them. Each decision follows the same pattern. Identify the safer option, measure its impact on engagement, choose engagement. And here's what makes this particularly damning. These weren't external criticisms or academic studies the company could dispute. These were Meta's own user experience researchers, conducting Meta's own internal studies, arriving at conclusions that Meta's own employees recognized as dangerous. One researcher posted in an internal chat, "Oh my gosh, y'all, IG is a drug." The response from a colleague, "We're basically pushers." This is the language of people who understand exactly what they're building. The master complaint alleges Meta relentlessly pursued a strategy of growth at all costs, recklessly ignoring the impact of their products on mental and physical health. But ignoring isn't quite accurate, is it? You can't ignore something you've measured. You can only choose not to act on what you've learned. Mark Zuckerberg's public position remains that there is no causal connection between social media and teen mental health issues. But causality is a high bar in science, the kind of standard you invoke when you want to avoid responsibility. The tobacco industry used the same argument for decades. Can you prove causality between smoking and lung cancer in any individual case? No, because causality is multifactorial and individual. Can you demonstrate correlation, increased risk, measurable harm? Absolutely. Meta had the correlation data. Project Mercury showed it. Their own employees recognized it. And they buried it. Sasha Haworth, executive director of the Tech Oversight Project, put it bluntly. Mark Zuckerberg is responsible for significant harm. That's activist language, sure, but the documents suggest the metaphor isn't hyperbolic. When you have research showing harm, employees comparing your product to substances, internal warnings about looking like tobacco companies, and you continue prioritizing engagement metrics over safety measures, you're making a choice about whose well-being matters. Now, Meta disputes all of this. Their response characterizes the allegations as cherry-picked quotes and misinformed opinions that present a deliberately misleading picture. They point to over a decade of work protecting teens, including teen accounts with built-in protections. Let's sit with that defense for a moment. The cherry-picked argument is interesting because these aren't quotes taken from sprawling, ambiguous discussions. They're product decision documentation and research findings. A quote about engagement metrics smashing from a privacy feature isn't taken out of context. It's a recorded rationale for a product choice. Cherry-picked suggests distortion. But distortion of what? The documents either show these decisions were made for these reasons, or they don't. The claim about a decade of work protecting teens also requires context. The lawsuit focuses on a recent period when many of these safety mechanisms were either absent or insufficient. Saying you've worked on teen safety for a decade doesn't address the specific allegation that, during critical years, you chose not to implement protections because they would hurt engagement. And this isn't just about Meta. The lawsuit targets Google-owned YouTube, TikTok, and Snapchat as well. Snapchat has pushed back, claiming their platform was designed differently from traditional social media, without public likes or comparison metrics. Google called the allegations simply not true. But here's what makes Meta's case particularly striking: the internal documents. Whether other companies operated similarly remains an open question because we don't have their paper trails yet. Parts of the brief remain redacted. The full scope might emerge at the upcoming court hearing, or it might stay buried under protective orders and settlements. What we do have is a pattern: research showing harm, employees recognizing harm, product decisions prioritizing engagement over safety, public testimony to Congress claiming the opposite, and millions of young users caught in the middle, their mental health measurably worse, their exposure to harmful content inadequately monitored, their privacy sacrificed for metrics. Previn Warren, co-lead attorney for the plaintiffs, draws the tobacco parallel explicitly. Like tobacco, this is a situation where there are dangerous products that were marketed to young people. More after our break.
Building a new product? Temez Labs takes you from Napkin Sketch to the App Store. Trusted by Fortune 500s for quality, security, and speed. Book your free strategy session at temez.ai.
The parallel works because both cases hinge on the same question. What did the company know, and when did they know it? With tobacco, it took decades and leaked internal documents to prove the industry understood the harm while publicly denying it. With Meta, we're watching that process play out in real time, compressed into court filings and unsealed discovery. There's something almost quaint about the employee who worried they'd look like tobacco companies. They understood the optics, the historical parallel, the weight of what they were doing. And it happened anyway. The practical implications here aren't subtle. If you're a parent, you're realizing the safety features you assumed were built in were afterthoughts, implemented reluctantly when engagement metrics allowed. If you're an educator dealing with increased anxiety and depression among students, you're looking at documented evidence that the platforms consuming hours of their daily attention were designed to maximize engagement, regardless of psychological impact. If you're a young person using these platforms, and let's be honest, you probably are, you're learning that the companies building your social infrastructure view your well-being as subordinate to their growth metrics. Not in a speculative, corporations are bad sense, but in a documented, paper trail, internal communications sense. And if you're a lawmaker who sat through testimony from Meta executives claiming they prioritize teen safety, you're confronting the possibility that you are systematically misled, not by spin or optimistic framing, but by omission of research the company had conducted and buried. The upcoming court hearing might reveal more. Parts of the filing remain sealed, and Meta has filed a motion to strike certain documents from the record. But the core narrative is already established. A company that knew its products caused measurable psychological harm to young users chose not to disclose that research and prioritized engagement metrics over safety measures that would have reduced that harm. The question now isn't what Meta knew. The documents answer that. The question is, what comes next? Whether this lawsuit represents a turning point in how we regulate social media companies, or just another round of bad press that gets absorbed into the cost of doing business. Because here's the thing about paper trails. They're patient. They wait in discovery. They survive spin and PR campaigns and corporate rebranding. They sit in court records, time-stamped and attributed, telling the story of what happened when nobody thought the public would ever see them. And what they tell us, in this case, is a story about a company that had every opportunity to choose differently and didn't. Thank you for listening to GREP News. If you are enjoying our podcast, please follow the show. Give us a 5-star rating to help us grow. And learn more at grep.news. Until next time.
GREP News. Temez.